Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, thank you very much for coming to UNC Chapel Hill. Thank you very much for coming to the Krasnodar event series. We very much enjoyed your lecture, which can be seen in full on our other channel. But let me ask you a few questions. One of the problems, that you mentioned it in your lecture, one of the problems of today is American relations with Russia. And I think we are all agreed some sort of reset would be sensible. But how do we do that?
That's an excellent question, and probably one of the most pressing ones I think we're confronting, especially given the fact that the president seems to be reluctant to do that given his domestic problems. I think nuclear weapons ought to be the opener. I think Putin has given us that signal that he gave it most powerfully, I think, with regard to our withdrawal from the Intermediate Nuclear Force Treaty. They're cheating, there's no question about that. And the treaty is not really applicable anymore because you've got Chinese, you've got other countries in the world that build these weapons. So we need to multilateralize that treaty if we want to keep that treaty. And I would try to do that. So we need to talk about nuclear weapons. Both of us, Russia and the United States, have a very important, critical interest in nuclear weapons, in the future of nuclear weapons, in the stability of those weapons, and in the non-proliferation of those weapons as much as we possibly can do. And that's what I would start with. I would say, you come to Washington or I'll come to Moscow. No preconditions at all. We need to talk. A whole new set of strategic talks, if you will, with regard to nuclear weapons, and increasingly bring others in, other nuclear powers in.
But one of the stumbling blocks is still Ukraine and what Russia is doing in Ukraine. While I believe Crimea is probably gone for good, and most people recognize that, but Eastern Ukraine is a very different question. What can be done about that?
Well, first, I think that should not be an impediment to talking about nuclear weapons.
Sure.
I think we should still do it. I think the Iran negotiations with the permanent members of the Security Council in Germany indicated to us that this kind of crucial diplomacy needs to be very precise, that you can't hang, as Henry Kissinger used to say, it's linked. You can't hang those linkages on it anymore. If it's a real serious issue, you got to go after it. So that's the first thing I'd say. Then I'd say, okay, we talked about nuclear weapons and we did a pretty good job. We got a good start. Now we need to talk about other things, including Ukraine, including Syria, including other problems that we have. And where shall we do it? My town or your town? I mean, I think we just need to talk. And I see this growing, this impediment to that, growing with the more encumbered Trump becomes with the, quote, Russia thing, unquote. And that's a shame.
Thank you. The other great powers where there are problems is, of course, China. There are serious economic and trade problems, but there are also geopolitical problems. And these geopolitical problems, South China Sea, competition in Africa and elsewhere, they seem to be heating up. But when one looks around the world and sees American influence and bases all around the world, and relatively little Chinese influence, I'm sometimes wondering, is there a degree of paranoia here? Does the United States is underconfident? Do they need to be underconfident, or is the geopolitical threat from China as serious as many people want to make us believe?
You make a good point. I think one of the things we lack in Washington and have lacked for a long time, since World War II in particular, is empathy. And by that I mean the military definition of empathy, which is to be able to get into your enemy or your potential enemies or even your friend's head and think like they do. See what they see what they think is threatening to them and so forth, and then shape your diplomacy around what you interpret. We don't do that anymore. We showed it. We thought Bashar al-Assad was the clone of Hosni Mubarak. The Obama administration thought, well, Mubarak went down, we got rid of him, let's get, they're not. They're two very different things. That's true about so many things in the world. There are no two states or two leaders who are alike. So I think we need to see China's situation from China's eyes. And when you look out from Beijing, you're surrounded. You're absolutely surrounded. You've got Japan, you've got Korea, you've got, to a certain extent, Myanmar, Burma, you've got Thailand, You've got the U.S. 7th Fleet and the rest of the United States Armada. You've got India, which is more and Pakistan is not really a great ally. So if I were looking out from Beijing, I'd say, well, you've got me surrounded, and I have to do something. I have to declare a obscene amount of territory in the South China Sea just to give my naval fleets the opportunity to maneuver before you sink them. That's the first thing you need to do, see it from their perspective. And when you look at it that way, you're right, it's paranoia on our part. We have them tied up pretty good. Now, I'll be the first one to admit that these 99-year leases with places like Sri Lanka and ports and facilities are disturbing in the sense that China is looking as if it's violating its own history. It is becoming an outward-looking power. It is becoming a power looking for territory overseas. It's in Djibouti now. One person told me the other day, if another French, Chinese, or American soldier or Marine lands on Djibouti, it'll sink. And of course, the leaders in Djibouti are simply they're playing Washington off against Beijing, off against whatever. But I think this presence could be positive. The Chinese have a lot of money after all. If we can check their tendency in Africa, for example, to be a little bit too hegemonic, if you will, to be a little bit too interested in their own living space, if you will, Lebensraum. If we can get a more balanced Chinese development policy, they could be a plus for the world. The Asia Bank that they started is a case in point. Why on earth did we not join? You never affect anything very well from the outside. Get in there, get on the inside, and help that development bank help people in Asia.
There's still time to join, of course.
Yes,
Yeah.
yes. I mean, we're talking about what? 50% of the world, and we're bottling them up.
President Trump referred to China and Russia as foes, but he also referred to the European Union as a foe, meaning in a trade sense. And even if you take that with a pinch of salt, still the relationship between the Europeans and the Americans, the transatlantic relationship, the alliance relations, the NATO alliance relationship, they are strained. Do you think that is just a temporary phenomenon, or is there something which is fundamentally wrong, so that the allies are actually moving further and further away from each other, drifting away, and whether or not Trump is in power, that will be a phenomenon which is going to continue?
That too is a very critical question, and it's one that is illuminated for me, at least, by a conversation that Colin Powell and I had in 1989, when he said, "Larry, look at the map. Do you realize that in all of those countries," pointing at Europe, "in all of those countries, we will soon have leaders who weren't even born in the war?" And what that's going to mean. It's going to mean a growing divide between Europe and the United States, because we no longer remember the past. We no longer think about what we've done for one another over the past years or during the war. I've seen a lot of that begun to happen in Germany and France and England and in Belgium and so forth. What's given it fresh blood, if you will, is the Eastern Europeans recently out of the Warsaw Pact and happy to be, where they are now. But that's not enough. That's not enough. We saw a little bit of the fragility of the alliance with its inability to deal with the crisis in the Balkans, to deal with the Kosovo and so forth. We may see that again. I'm really worried about what might happen in Mitrovica, the northern province in Kosovo, because little green men are already showing up there. And it looks almost like now, if you're not served, you better not cross that bridge and go into Mitrovica, because they'll kill you.
But you believe the NATO alliance as such, or transatlantic relations, are basically still sound, or are they really?
I think they're fracturing. I really do. I think Brexit was a sign of it. I think Trump is playing on something that he may not really intellectually understand, but I think he's going after better burden sharing, if you will, but he maybe doesn't understand that what I just said is increasingly the case, that they're looking at new relationships and new power structures and becoming distrustful of the old relationships and becoming, in a word, distrustful of us. The polls show that too. The polls are really disturbing to me to see majority of the Koreans, majority of the Japanese, and so forth, and others. I don't think we're going to see that in Germany, France, and England because there are so many other connections. And maybe that's the saving grace. Maybe there are just so many connections, family connections, economic, financial, and so forth, between London, Paris, and Berlin, and us, and Brussels. And I might throw in there Oslo, Helsinki, and that's what's going to keep it together through thick and thin. But I don't think it's going to be as robust a military alliance and security relationship as it was in the past. And I think that's inevitable.
Thank you. There are many other problems we could talk about. Just pick one, Iran. Iran has become an American obsession for a long time, really since 1979 and the hostage crisis and the failed rescue attempt. But the Trump administration seems to be particularly obsessed with the Iran problem. Why is that, and how can that be resolved? How can that be overcome? Because that also is a very tense relationship which urgently needs a reset, I would say.
One word answer, Israel. I think what Netanyahu sees is what Washington is going to see. Gideon Levy of Haaretz said the other day, it's not Washington. Here's how he said, U.S. Middle East policy is not made in Washington, it's made in Tel Aviv. Well, he could have said Jerusalem. I think there's a lot of truth to that. Mm-hmm. As long as Israel sees Iran for, I think, strictly now, political purposes, it's what keeps that politics of fear and the exploitation of it is what keeps Netanyahu's grip on the Israeli electorate. As long as that's the case, it's going to be very difficult. Obama tried. He made some progress. And, we were supposed to go on. And this was the George W. Bush plan, too, to use the nuclear talks to go on to other talks about ballistic missiles, about terrorism, about corruption, about their banking system, which is just so corrupt it can't meld itself into the international financial system without a lot of reform. We're going to talk about all of that. So was the Obama administration. Trump cut all that off. Trump just stopped it cold. So we're at a point now with Iran that is as dangerous as any we've been at. A lot of it's the legacy of the 79 revolution. I think John Bolton would sit right here and tell you that until they pay for those 440 days of hostage taking, we won't be satisfied. And he'd mean it. And there are others who feel that way. And then there are others who feel like the relationship with Saudi Arabia is so vital. God knows why they feel that way, but they do, probably because they're taking money from them, that we can't afford to not see Tehran through Riyadh's eyes. And Riyadh abominates Tehran. Oddly, strangely, bizarrely, one of the reasons, not for the Saudis, but one of the reasons the Saudis hate Tehran is their modicum of democracy. They do have elections, even if the people being elected are selected beforehand. They do have a modicum of democracy, and that is anathema to the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia.
Thank you very much. It's all very gloomy.
Yes.
Is there anything more positive, more optimistic you can say when you survey the world situation?
There is a positive development, and it is that not only amongst the American population, but in Washington and in the leadership circles that I move through frequently, they are beginning to understand that the scientists are right, that the climate crisis is coming down the tracks at us like a freight train going 150 miles an hour already. They understand how far behind we are. They are still perplexed as to exactly what to do, but they're getting their act together slowly. I hope it's fast enough, because some scientists are telling us we may be beyond the point where we can do anything other than adapt to a very bad situation. But that's the positive note I would bring.
So the overall situation is pretty dire.
Well, the Oval Office on this one is just checked out. It's just checked out. It doesn't care. EPA, all of them, they're just checked out. But the Congress isn't. Funny thing happened on the way to the bank on the last legislation. Trump's team zeroed out or reduced significantly almost everything in the annual budget last year that was aimed directly or indirectly at doing something about the climate crisis. The Congress restored it all, and in some cases even plussed it up. So they're beginning to get it. They may not admit it, but they're beginning to get it.
Let's hope you're right. Colonel Lawrence Wilkerson, thank you very much for coming and talking to us. Much appreciated.
Thank you.
Please come again.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Thank you very much.
Sure.